Behind the golden curtain of Hollywood's most glamorous era lay secrets so devastating that they could destroy careers, end marriages, and shatter the very illusion of perfection that studios worked so desperately to maintain. These weren't just scandals, they were confessions that ripped through the fabric of Tinseltown like wildfire, leaving broken hearts and shattered dreams in their wake. Tonight, we unveiled the shocking truths that Hollywood's biggest stars carried to their graves, and the few brave enough to finally speak. The year was 1962, and Hollywood had never seemed more perfect. Yet behind the carefully orchestrated smiles and red carpet glamour, a darkness was spreading through the industry like poison. The studio system demanded perfection, not just in performance, but in every aspect of a star's existence. What the world didn't know was that this pursuit of flawless facades was slowly destroying the very people it was meant to protect. Judy Garland, America's sweetheart, had been carrying a secret that would have horrified her millions of fans. The pills that kept her thin, the stimulants that gave her energy for 18-hour filming days, and the sedatives that finally allowed her to sleep. They had become her only companions in a world that demanded everything while giving nothing. In return, when she finally confessed to a close friend in 1965, her words were haunting. "I've been dying inside for 20 years, and everyone just keeps applauding." But Judy wasn't alone. Across Hollywood, stars were beginning to crack under the immense pressure of maintaining their public personas. The confession letters that surfaced decades later revealed a pattern of psychological manipulation that would make modern audiences gasp in disbelief. Studios controlled every aspect of their stars' lives: who they married, where they lived, what they ate, and even how they grieved. The most shocking revelation came from a private diary found in the estate of a major studio executive. The entries detailed how stars were systematically isolated from their families, fed addictive substances to control their weight and energy levels, and threatened with career destruction if they dared to speak out. One entry, dated March 1963, coldly noted, "The talent must never realize they have any power. Their desperation is our greatest asset." These confessions painted a picture of an industry that had lost its soul in pursuit of profit, leaving behind a trail of broken spirits and shattered dreams that would haunt Hollywood for generations to come. In the autumn of 1958, a single love letter would trigger the most devastating scandal in Hollywood history, one that would topple careers, destroy families, and expose the hypocrisy at the heart of America's moral crusade. The letter, written on cream-colored stationery with a studio executive's personal seal, contained words of passionate devotion that would have seemed beautiful in any other context. But the names signed at the bottom would send shockwaves through an industry already trembling on the edge of massive social change. The affair had been brewing for months in the shadows of soundstages and behind the closed doors of exclusive Hollywood parties. She was America's golden goddess, married to the nation's baseball hero, representing everything pure and wholesome about American womanhood. He was the brilliant but tormented playwright whose words had captivated Broadway. A man whose own marriage was crumbling under the weight of his artistic obsessions. Their first meeting had been electric. Witnesses later described seeing literal sparks fly between them during a charity function at the Ambassador Hotel. What began as stolen glances across crowded rooms evolved into clandestine meetings in rented bunk, passionate embraces in darkened theaters, and ultimately, a love so consuming that both were willing to risk everything they had built. The confession came not from either lover, but from an unexpected source, the heartbroken spouse who had discovered the affair through a private investigator's photographs. The betrayal cut so deep that revenge became the only salve for wounded pride. Phone calls were made to gossip columnists, letters were leaked to rival studios, and suddenly, the most carefully guarded secret in Hollywood became front-page news across America. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Studio contracts were terminated, endorsement deals vanished overnight, and the golden couple who had once represented American perfection found themselves exiled from the very industry that had created their legends. Their confessions, given years later, two sympathetic biographers, revealed the crushing weight of trying to maintain impossible standards while fighting for a love that society deemed unacceptable. The scars from this scandal would forever change how Hollywood handled its stars' private lives. For 30 years, he had been Hollywood royalty, the visionary director whose films defined an entire generation's understanding of romance, adventure, and the American dream. His movies had won countless awards, made studios hundreds of millions of dollars, and turned unknown actors into household names. But in 1987, in a hotel room overlooking Sunset Boulevard, this titan of the industry would make a confession so disturbing that it would force Hollywood to confront its darkest demons. The director's hands shook as he spoke to the investigative journalist who had been pursuing this story for months. The tape recorder between them seemed to hum with anticipation, as he finally began to unravel decades of carefully constructed lies. "You have to understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The system was designed to protect monsters, and I became one of them. What followed was a harrowing account of systematic abuse that had been hidden behind the glamour and power of Hollywood's golden age. The director revealed how certain industry figures had created an informal network of pipeline that allowed them to exploit young, desperate actors and actresses who came to Hollywood with nothing but dreams and determination. The casting couch wasn't just a crude joke, it was a weapon of psychological warfare that destroyed countless lives. The most shocking aspect of his confession wasn't the abuse itself, but the elaborate system that had been created to silence victims. Threats, blacklisting, manufactured scandals. The industry had developed a sophisticated machine for protecting predators while destroying those who dared to speak out. The director's own rise to power had been built on his willingness to participate in this system, trading his moral compass for career advancement. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, the director's confession revealed names that would send shockwaves through Hollywood's power structure. Some were already dead, taking their secrets to the grave. Others were still active in the industry, their crimes protected by statutes of limitations and an industry culture that valued reputation over justice. This single confession would eventually inspire dozens of others, creating a reckoning that continues to reshape Hollywood today. The envelope was found 3 days after the funeral, tucked behind a mirror in her dressing room at the studio where she had filmed her final, tragic performance. The pink stationery was stained with tears, both fresh and old, and the handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the letter progressed. When the studio head's secretary finally opened it, expecting perhaps a thank you note or a request for a recommendation, she instead discovered a confession so devastating that it would change Hollywood forever. She had been just 19 when she arrived in Los Angeles, clutching a bus ticket from Oklahoma and carrying dreams larger than the small suitcase that held all her worldly possessions. Within 6 months, she had signed with one of the major studios. Within a year, she was starring in romantic comedies that made audiences laugh and cry in equal measure. Within 2 years, she was dead by her own hand, leaving behind a letter that exposed the true cost of Hollywood dreams. The confession revealed a systematic pattern of exploitation that went far beyond what even the most cynical industry insiders had imagined. The young starlet detailed how she had been passed from executive to executive like a party favor, each promising career advancement in exchange for increasingly degrading compromises. The studio's talent development program was revealed to be a sophisticated grooming operation that identified vulnerable young women and systematically stripped away their dignity, their agency, and ultimately their will to live. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of her confession was her description of the psychological manipulation that accompanied the physical abuse. The studio had employed a team of image consultants who were actually skilled manipulators, trained to identify each starlet's deepest insecurities and exploit them for maximum control. They convinced her that she was worthless without their approval, that her family back home would be ashamed of her if they knew the truth, and that her only value lay in her willingness to please powerful men. The letter's final paragraphs painted a picture of complete despair, a young woman who had lost all sense of self-worth and saw death as her only escape from a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Her confession forced the industry to confront the human cost of its pursuit of profit, though the changes that followed came too late to save her or the countless others who had suffered in silence. He lay in the hospital bed, tubes and wires, connecting his failing body to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. At 83 years old, the legendary producer who had shaped Hollywood's golden age was finally facing mortality, and with it, the weight of secrets he had carried for more than half a century. As his family gathered around him, expecting perhaps final words of wisdom or love, he instead delivered a confession that would expose Hollywood's greatest cover-up. The year was 1993, and the producer's voice was weak but determined as he began to unravel a conspiracy that had protected one of Hollywood's biggest stars for decades. The truth, he revealed, was that the icon's death had not been the tragic accident the world had been told. Instead, it was the final act in a drama of blackmail, betrayal, and murder that reached into the highest levels of both Hollywood and organized crime. The confession began with the producer's own complicity in the cover-up. As a young studio executive in the 1960s, he had been approached by powerful figures who demanded his help in manufacturing a false narrative around the star's death. The real story involving gambling debts, mob connections, and a love triangle that included some of Hollywood's most powerful figures was too explosive to ever see the light of day. So they created an alternative version, complete with false witnesses, manufactured evidence, and a carefully orchestrated media campaign that convinced the world of a lie. What made his deathbed confession even more shocking was his revelation of how many people had been involved in the cover-up. Police officers, coroners, journalists, studio executives, and even federal agents had all played their parts in maintaining the deception. Some were bought with money, others with promises of career advancement, and a few were simply too terrified of the consequences to refuse. The producer himself had been given a choice: participate in the cover-up or watch his own career and possibly his life come to a sudden end as his final breaths approached. The producer's confession revealed the location of documents that would prove everything he had claimed. Hidden in a safety deposit box for 30 years. These papers contained photographs, financial records, and signed statements that would finally expose the truth. His family, stunned by these revelations, faced an impossible choice: honor his final wish by releasing the documents, or protect the memory of Hollywood's golden age by keeping the secret buried forever. The interview was supposed to be a retrospective, a chance for America's former sweetheart to look back fondly on her days as Hollywood's most beloved child star. But as the cameras rolled in 1995, the 50-year-old actress instead delivered a confession so disturbing that the network initially refused to air it. Her words would forever change how the world viewed the supposed innocence of Hollywood's golden age and expose a pattern of abuse that had been hidden behind bright smiles and cheerful musical numbers. She had been just 7 years old when she first stepped onto a soundstage, her mother's hand firmly gripping her small shoulder. As studio executives evaluated her potential, within months, she was the star of a major film franchise, her dimpled smile and precocious talent earning millions for the studio and making her a household name across America. But behind the cameras, a different story was unfolding, one of systematic exploitation and abuse that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The confession revealed how child stars were treated as valuable commodities rather than human beings. Their days began before dawn and stretched late into the night, with tutoring sessions squeezed between takes and meals consumed on the run between costume changes. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the psychological manipulation that became a daily reality. Studio executives and directors used a combination of praise and threats to maintain control, convincing the children that their worth as human beings depended entirely on their ability to perform on command. The most heartbreaking aspect of her revelation was her description of how the adults in her life, including her own parents, had been complicit in the abuse. The financial rewards were too tempting to resist, and the studio's power too intimidating to challenge. Her mother, she revealed, had been given a choice: allow the studio complete control over her daughter's life, or watch their family face financial ruin. The decision, once made, set in motion a series of events that would rob a little girl of her childhood and replace it with a nightmare of exploitation and manipulation. As her confession continued, the former child star detailed specific incidents of abuse that had been covered up by studio publicity departments. Medical records were falsified to hide injuries. Psychological trauma was dismissed as artistic temperament, and any attempt to speak out was met with threats of career destruction. The bright, cheerful movies that had entertained millions were revealed to be built on a foundation of suffering that had been deliberately hidden from the world. They were the golden couple of Hollywood's silver screen. He, the ruggedly handsome leading man whose strong jaw and piercing eyes had made him the fantasy of women across America. She, the elegant beauty whose grace and sophistication epitomized everything glamorous about Hollywood royalty. Their wedding, in 1959, had been called the event of the decade, photographed by every major magazine and celebrated as a fairy tale romance come to life. But 40 years later, in a confession that would rock the entertainment world to its core, the truth about their marriage would finally emerge. The revelation came in the form of a memoir published posthumously, its pages filled with a confession so shocking that publishers initially questioned its authenticity. The marriage that had symbolized Hollywood perfection was revealed to be an elaborate deception, a carefully orchestrated business arrangement designed to protect two careers that would have been destroyed if the truth had been known. In an era when certain aspects of personal identity were considered career suicide, the fake marriage had been their only option for survival in the unforgiving world of studio-controlled Hollywood. The confession detailed how the arrangement had been brokered by powerful studio executives who recognized that both stars' careers were at risk due to their authentic romantic inclinations. The solution they proposed was coldly practical: a marriage that would provide cover for both parties while maintaining their marketable image as America's sweethearts. What followed was years of carefully choreographed public appearances, staged romantic moments for photographers, and the constant pressure of maintaining a lie that grew more exhausting with each passing year. Behind the facade of marital bliss lay two separate lives filled with genuine love and authentic relationships that had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. The memoir revealed the coded language they used to communicate with their real partners, the elaborate schemes they devised to spend time with the people they actually loved, and the constant fear that discovery would destroy not only their careers but also the lives of everyone involved in the deception. The most tragic aspect of the confession was its revelation of how the pressure of maintaining the fake marriage had ultimately destroyed their genuine friendship. What had begun as a mutually beneficial arrangement between two people who cared for each other had evolved into a prison of resentment and regret. The final entries in the memoir describe the profound sadness of growing old while living a lie, and the bitter irony that their greatest acting performances had been given not on screen, but in the daily theater of their fabricated personal lives. The letter arrived at the loss Angeles Times exactly 1 week after the funeral. Postmarked 3 days earlier and bearing the unmistakable letterhead of one of Hollywood's most powerful studios. Inside, 23 pages of typed confession from the studio's recently deceased chief executive would expose a system of control and manipulation that had operated for decades behind the glamorous facade of the entertainment industry. The man who had once been known as the King of Hollywood was making his final act a devastating revelation about the monsters he had helped create. The confession began with a simple admission. I built a machine designed to destroy human souls, and I convinced myself it was entertainment. What followed was a methodical dismantling of everything the public thought they knew about how Hollywood operated during its supposed golden age. The executive revealed that the studio system wasn't just a business model, it was a sophisticated form of psychological warfare designed to extract maximum profit from human desperation and ambition. The most chilling aspect of his confession was his detailed description of how young performers were systematically broken down and rebuilt according to the studio's specifications. Physical appearance was altered through surgical procedures that were often experimental and dangerous. Personalities were reconstructed through a combination of drugs, therapy, and psychological manipulation that bore more resemblance to brainwashing than talent development. Names, backgrounds, even family histories were fabricated to create more marketable personas, leaving the real people buried beneath layers of manufactured identity. The executive's revelation exposed the dark side of the star-making machine that had captivated America for decades. He described how studios maintained detailed psychological profiles on every performer, using this information to exploit their deepest fears and insecurities. Stars who showed signs of independence were systematically undermined through planted stories in gossip columns, manufactured scandals, and strategic career sabotage. Those who attempted to leave were often destroyed completely, their reputations and finances ruined as a warning to others who might consider rebellion. Most devastating aspect of his confession was his revelation of the human cost of this system. The executive provided names and dates, documenting dozens of suicides, overdoses, and mental breakdowns that he directly attributed to the psychological torture that passed for talent management. His final words were a plea for forgiveness from the families of those who had been destroyed by the machine he had helped perfect. I told myself we were making dreams come true, but we were actually manufacturing nightmares. Deep in the basement of a nondescript office building in Burbank, surrounded by towers of manila folders and boxes of yellowed paper, sat the woman who knew Hollywood's secrets better than anyone alive. For 40 years, she had been the industry's most trusted ghostwriter, the invisible hand behind dozens of celebrity autobiographies that had topped bestseller lists and won prestigious awards. But the books that made it to print, she would finally confess, were sanitized versions of much darker truths, the real stories, locked away in files that would make the world question everything they thought they knew about their favorite stars. The ghostwriter's confession came in 2001, during what she believed would be her final interview before retiring to obscurity. What she revealed was a vault of unpublished material that read like a catalog of Hollywood's darkest moments, detailed accounts of abuse, addiction, crime, and corruption that had been deemed too explosive for public consumption. Each manuscript in her collection represented months of interviews with broken stars desperate to tell their truth, only to have publishers, studios, and lawyers conspire to silence their voices forever. The most shocking revelation was her description of the systematic suppression of these authentic confessions. Publishers would commission the books, pay substantial advances, and encourage the stars to reveal everything only to demand extensive rewrites that removed anything controversial or legally dangerous. When the subjects refused to sanitize their stories, the projects would be quietly canceled, the manuscripts buried, and the subjects often blacklisted from the industry entirely. Among the suppressed confessions was a harrowing account from a beloved comedy star who revealed decades of severe abuse at the hands of a powerful director. The manuscript detailed not only the physical and emotional trauma he had endured, but also his knowledge of other victims who had been silenced through threats, bribes, and career destruction. Another suppressed book contained a female star's detailed account of being drugged and assaulted by multiple industry figures, complete with dates, locations, and witness names that could have led to criminal prosecutions. The ghostwriter's final revelation was perhaps the most disturbing. She possessed audio recordings of many of these interviews, preserved as insurance against the powerful forces that had suppressed the written accounts. These tapes, she claimed, contained confessions that would not only destroy reputations but potentially lead to criminal charges against figures who were still alive and active in the industry. Her decision to finally speak about these hidden files represented a last-ditch effort to ensure that the truth would eventually emerge, even if it took decades for the world to be ready to hear it. The phone call came at 3 in the morning, the voice on the other end shaking with a mixture of terror and determination. After 35 years in the industry, the man known as Hollywood's most successful casting director was finally ready to confess to crimes that had haunted his conscience for decades. The meeting was arranged for the following evening in a small cafe in Santa Monica, far from the prying eyes and ears that dominated every corner of the entertainment industry. What he would reveal in those 4 hours of recorded conversation would expose a systematic pattern of exploitation that reached into every level of Hollywood's power structure. The casting director's confession began with an admission that casting sessions were often elaborate facades designed to identify vulnerable young actors who could be exploited by powerful industry figures. Legitimate auditions were mixed with predatory encounters, making it impossible for victims to distinguish between professional opportunities and criminal exploitation. The casting director revealed that he had been recruited into this system early in his career, when refusing to participate would have meant the end of his professional life in Hollywood. The most disturbing aspect of his revelation was his detailed description of how the exploitation network operated. Certain roles were never intended to be filled through legitimate casting. They existed solely as bait to lure vulnerable performers into situations where they could be abused. The casting director would identify actors who seemed desperate enough to accept any offer, isolated enough to have no one to turn to for help, and naive enough to believe that degrading treatment was simply part of the business. The confession revealed that this systematic exploitation was protected by an elaborate network of complicit industry professionals. Agents who sent their clients into dangerous situations while pretending ignorance of the risks. Publicists who manufactured cover stories to explain away suspicious injuries or psychological breakdowns. Studio executives who provided financial resources and legal protection to ensure that the network's activities never faced serious investigation. Perhaps, the most heartbreaking aspect of the casting director's revelation was his description of the victims who had tried to speak out over the years. Many were dismissed as attention seekers or blacklisted from the industry entirely. Others were subjected to character assassination campaigns that destroyed their credibility before they could present evidence of their abuse. Some simply disappeared from Hollywood altogether, their dreams shattered and their spirits broken by an industry that had consumed them completely.